The carriage arrived as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, colors that seemed prophetic now, in retrospect. Colors of blood and treasure, of sacrifice and worth. King Varik stood at the entrance to his great hall, flanked by his most trusted warriors, awaiting the arrival of his bride-to-be. He had not asked for a portrait, had not inquired about her appearance or her accomplishments. Such things were irrelevant to him. This was duty, nothing more. He would marry, produce an heir, and continue the legacy of his bloodline. Emotion did not factor into the equation. Before we dive deep into this story, please I would want you to me your name, where you're watching from, and subscribe to this channel as part of support and motivation to us. The carriage door opened, and his entire world shattered. What emerged was not the woman he had been promised, not the mature Omega ready to bear children and strengthen his lineage. What emerged was a child. A little girl, no more than 12 years old, drowning in a wedding dress that had clearly been made for someone much larger, much older. The white fabric pooled around her feet, trailing behind her like a ghost. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with undisguised terror. She trembled. Visibly, uncontrollably trembled. And in that moment, King Varik, who had stared down armies without flinching, who had faced death 1,000 times without fear, felt something he had not experienced in decades. Shock. Pure, absolute shock. He stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to move, as this child took hesitant steps toward him, each footfall clearly requiring every ounce of courage she possessed. Behind her, the representatives of the Omega clan watched with carefully neutral expressions, as if they had delivered exactly what was promised, as if there was nothing unusual about this transaction. The girl stopped a few feet away from him, and he could see her fighting not to cry, fighting not to run, fighting not to collapse under the weight of her fear. She was so small, so impossibly, heartbreakingly small. Her name was Iris. He would learn this later, during the confrontation that followed, during the hours of rage and accusation that shook the very foundations of his castle. The Omega clan representatives insisted that the contract had been honored. Technically, legally, they had provided an Omega bride of their bloodline as agreed. That she was a child was, in their carefully worded argument, irrelevant to the binding nature of the agreement. Among their people, they claimed, such arrangements were sometimes made years in advance, with the understanding that the marriage would be consummated when appropriate. King Varik's roar of fury that night was heard for miles. Trees shook. Stone cracked. His warriors, battle-hardened and fierce, actually stepped back from the force of his rage. But beneath the anger, beneath the sense of betrayal and manipulation, there was something else. Something that surprised him even more than the arrival of the child bride. When he looked at Iris, truly looked at her, past the ridiculous dress and the terror in her eyes, he saw something that pierced through 300 years of carefully constructed emotional armor. He saw a victim, an innocent, a little girl who had been used as a pawn in a game she couldn't possibly understand, sold by her own people, delivered to a monster she had been taught to fear. She had done nothing wrong. She was guilty of nothing except being born into the wrong family at the wrong time. And in that moment, King Varik made a decision that would define the next 15 years of his existence. A decision that would test him in ways no battle ever had, that would require a strength he didn't know he possessed. He would not marry this child. He would not touch her, would not claim her, would not force upon her the fate that others had so callously arranged. Instead, he would protect her. He knelt, the Beast King, who knelt for no one, who had not bent knee even to the old gods themselves, and lowered himself to her eye level. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle in a way his warriors had never heard before. "You are safe here," he told her, watching as confusion flickered across her terrified features. "No one will harm you. No one will force you into anything. I give you my word, little one, and my word has never been broken." The Omega representatives protested, of course. They demanded he honor the contract, fulfill the agreement. But King Varik simply turned to them with eyes that promised death, and they fell silent. By dawn, they were gone, fleeing back to their territories with their lives intact only because he had shown them mercy he rarely extended. The contract remained technically unfulfilled. The alliance unconsummated. But he didn't care. Some things, he discovered, were more important than political expedience. Some things were worth more than power. And so began the strangest chapter of King Varik's long life. He, who had built his existence on strength and dominance, became a guardian to a frightened child. He, who trusted no one completely, found himself responsible for someone utterly dependent on his protection. He assigned Iris to chambers in the eastern wing of the castle, rooms that caught the morning sun and overlooked the gardens rather than the stark wilderness beyond. He appointed his most trusted servants to care for her, women who had served his household for decades, who possessed the gentleness his warriors lacked. He ordered that she be educated, that she be given access to his extensive library, that she be taught not just the skills expected of an Omega, but whatever knowledge she desired to pursue. If she was to live in his household, she would not be kept in ignorance. She would not be treated as property. But he kept his distance. In those early years, he barely spoke to her directly, communicating instead through his staff, observing her from afar like some sort of benevolent shadow. He told himself this was appropriate, that maintaining distance was the responsible thing to do. She needed stability, safety, normalcy, not the constant presence of the fearsome creature who ruled this domain. Yet every night, as he stood in his private chambers overlooking the courtyard, he found himself watching the light in her window, ensuring it went dark at a reasonable hour, confirming she was safe. Every morning, he inquired about her well-being, her studies, her needs. The years began to pass. Iris adapted to life in the Lycan castle with a resilience that surprised everyone, perhaps even herself. The traumatized child who had arrived in an oversized wedding dress slowly transformed, healing in the safety King Varik had promised her. By 13, she no longer flinched at the sound of wolf howls in the night. By 14, she walked the castle halls with her head held high, greeting the Lycan warriors with polite nods rather than terrified whispers. By 15, she had not only caught up with but exceeded the educational standards for Omega children her age. She developed routines. Every morning, she would take breakfast in the garden when weather permitted, reading whatever book had captured her interest. In the afternoons, she studied with the tutors King Varik had hired, scholars from across the realm who taught her history, literature, mathematics, the healing arts specific to her Omega abilities. Evenings, she spent time with the household staff, learning their stories, asking about their lives. With a genuine interest that endeared her to everyone she met. The servants, initially wary of this strange addition to their household, found themselves charmed by her kindness, her curiosity, her complete lack of pretension. She never demanded special treatment. She never used her connection to the king as leverage. She simply existed, quietly and gracefully, becoming as much a part of the castle as the ancient stones themselves. And as she grew, her inherent gifts began to manifest. All Omegas possess empathic abilities to some degree. It's the cornerstone of their magical heritage. But Iris's gift was exceptional, even by Omega standards. She could sense emotions with extraordinary precision, could feel the pain and joy of those around her as if they were her own. More remarkably, she could soothe suffering with her presence alone, could ease the trauma of battle-scarred warriors simply by sitting beside them. The Lycan warriors, who had initially viewed her with confusion at best and resentment at worst, this child who had somehow inserted herself into their king's household, this weak Omega in a kingdom built on strength, began to seek her out. After difficult patrols, after conflicts with rival clans, after nights when the memories of violence became too heavy to bear, they would find their way to the gardens where Iris spent her time. She never turned anyone away. She would listen to their stories, absorb their pain, offer comfort through nothing more than her presence and her gift. She asked for nothing in return. Word spread throughout the kingdom. The king's ward, for that was how everyone had come to think of her, as his ward rather than his intended bride, possessed a remarkable gift. She was healing the Lycan warriors in ways physical medicine never could, mending wounds of the spirit that had festered for years. She became, without ever seeking the role, a treasure of the kingdom, valued not for any political alliance or promised heir, but for herself, for the genuine good she brought to everyone around her. King Varik watched this transformation with feelings he couldn't entirely name. Pride, certainly. Satisfaction that his decision to protect her had given her space to flourish. Relief that she had not only survived but thrived under his guardianship. But there was something else too. Something that grew stronger with each passing year, something he refused to acknowledge, even in the privacy of his own thoughts. He found himself timing his walks through the castle to coincide with her presence in certain halls. Found reasons to review reports near the windows that overlooked her garden. Found excuses to speak with the servants who attended her, asking after her well-being with what he told himself was merely appropriate concern. When she turned 16, everything shifted. Subtly at first, then with increasing intensity. She had been living in his household for 4 years by then, and the terrified child was gone completely, replaced by a young woman of remarkable grace and growing beauty. She moved through the world with confidence now, her initial fear replaced by a quiet strength that commanded respect without demanding it. One evening, King Varik encountered her in the library, a vast chamber that took up the entire western tower, filled with thousands of volumes collected over his centuries of existence. He had come seeking a particular military treatise, something to occupy his mind during another sleepless night. He found Iris curled in one of the reading alcoves, surrounded by books, her face illuminated by candlelight as she pored over a text of advanced healing techniques. She looked up when he entered, and their eyes met across the shadowed space. "Your Majesty," she said, rising and offering a respectful curtsy. But there was no fear in her voice anymore, no trembling in her movements. Just simple courtesy. "You don't need to stand on ceremony when we're alone," he heard himself say, surprising them both. "We've shared a household for years now." She smiled then, a genuine expression of warmth that did something strange to his chest, something he couldn't explain and didn't want to examine. "Then you don't need to lurk in doorways, Your Majesty. You're welcome to share the library. It is yours, after all." Her gentle teasing shocked him. No one spoke to him with such casual familiarity. No one dared. But instead of the anger such presumption might have provoked, he felt something dangerously close to delight. They talked that night. Really talked, perhaps for the first time since she had arrived. About books and history, about the healing arts she was studying, about the philosophy of leadership and the burden of power. She asked him questions no one else dared ask, challenged his assumptions with a thoughtfulness that demonstrated genuine intelligence rather than childish rebellion. The hours slipped away. When he finally left the library, the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains. And King Varik realized, with something approaching horror, that he had enjoyed himself. More than he had in decades. Possibly more than he had in centuries. This became their pattern. Not every night, but often enough that he began to anticipate these encounters, began to find himself disappointed on evenings when she wasn't there. They would discuss everything and nothing, arguing about literature, debating history, sharing the kind of intellectual companionship he had long ago resigned himself to living without. She challenged him, made him laugh, something his warriors claimed was impossible, made him think about questions he had long since decided were settled. And slowly, terrifyingly, he began to see her not as the child he was protecting, but as the woman she was becoming. When Iris was 17, 5 years into her residence at the castle, she sought him out deliberately for the first time. It was spring, the season when even the harsh northern wilds softened slightly, when wildflowers dared to bloom between the rocks and the air carried hints of warmth alongside its usual bite. King Varik was in his private study, reviewing intelligence reports from the border territories, when one of his servants announced that Iris requested an audience. He granted it, of course, though something in the servant's expression made his instincts prickle with unease. She entered his study with her head held high, determination in every line of her posture. She had dressed formally, a deep blue gown that brought out the color of her eyes, her dark hair arranged with care. She looked beautiful, and that observation alone should have warned him what was coming. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice steady despite the slight flush in her cheeks. "I need to speak with you about something important." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, but she remained standing. Another warning sign. "I've been in your household for 5 years now," she continued, her hands clasped in front of her to stop them from trembling. "5 years during which you have shown me nothing but kindness and protection. You gave me safety when I had none, education when I was ignorant, a home when I was abandoned. You asked for nothing in return except that I be happy and healthy." "Iris," he started, but she pressed forward, the words tumbling out as if she had rehearsed them countless times and needed to speak them before her courage failed. "I know what the original arrangement was. I know I was brought here to be your bride, and I know you rejected that arrangement because I was too young. Because you are too honorable to allow such a thing, even when it would have benefited you politically."
His jaw tightened.
Where was this leading? "But I'm not a child anymore, Your Majesty. I'm 17. In my clan, I would already be considered of marriageable age. And I need to tell you." She took a deep breath, and he saw her gather every ounce of courage she possessed. "I need to tell you that I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence, like something that couldn't be taken back or ignored. King Varik felt as if he'd been struck. Actually physically struck, the way he hadn't been in battle for decades. His mind reeled, even as his treacherous heart leapt at her words. "I've loved you for years, I think," she continued, her voice gaining strength now that the worst was said. "I don't know exactly when it started. Maybe when I first saw you treat your warriors with respect rather than brutality. Maybe when I discovered your library and realized you valued knowledge as much as power. Maybe during one of our late-night conversations when you listened to my thoughts as if they mattered." She stepped closer to his desk, and he found himself frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. "I know you see me as your ward, as someone under your protection. But I am also a woman who knows her own heart. And my heart belongs to you." The silence that followed was deafening. King Varik stared at this young woman who had somehow, without him noticing, claimed a piece of his soul. Every instinct he possessed screamed contradictory commands. Part of him wanted to pull her into his arms, to confess that he had been fighting similar feelings for longer than he cared to admit. Part of him wanted to run, to retreat, to rebuild the walls she had somehow breached. What emerged from his mouth was denial. Cold, harsh, absolute.
"No."
She flinched as if he'd slapped her. "You are 17 years old, Iris. Still a child in many ways, despite your intelligence and your gifts. What you feel is gratitude, perhaps a form of dependency. You've lived under my protection since you were 12. I am the first adult male to show you consistent kindness. It's natural that you might confuse those feelings for something else." "I'm not confused," she started, but he cut her off, his voice taking on the commanding tone that made even his fiercest warriors obey without question. "You are." He stood, and she had to crane her neck to look up at him, reminded viscerally of the difference in their size, their power, their age. "You think you know your heart, but you have experienced nothing of the world beyond these walls. You have met no other men, formed no other attachments. How can you possibly know what you feel is real?" Tears gathered in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Because I know myself. Because I've spent 5 years observing you, learning who you are beneath the fearsome reputation. Because when I use my empathic gifts, when I sense the emotions of everyone around me, I know the difference between gratitude and love." "You're 17, he repeated, as if this settled everything. "A child." "I'm not. In my eyes, you are." The words came out harsher than he intended, sharp enough to make her step back. "I have lived for 300 years, Iris. When I look at you, I see someone who has barely begun her life. The power dynamic between us is too great, the difference in our ages too vast. For me to accept what you're offering would be a betrayal of every promise I made when I took you into my protection." Her face had gone pale, but her chin lifted in defiance. "So you feel nothing for me?"
Would have been easier to lie.
"Kinder, perhaps, to crush this cleanly rather than let hope linger. But King Varik had built his reputation on many things, and one of them was truth. He did not lie, not even when the truth was devastating. "What I feel is irrelevant," he said instead. "I will not take advantage of someone who has been in my care, who depends on me for safety and stability. I will not be that man." "I'm not asking you to take advantage." That's exactly what it would be. He moved around the desk, keeping a careful distance between them, even as everything in him wanted to close that gap. "You deserve better than this, Iris. Better than an old beast who has blood on his hands and darkness in his soul. You deserve someone young, someone who can give you a normal life, someone who hasn't lived long enough to become the monster I am." "You're not a monster." "I am," he said quietly. "I absolutely am. And the fact that you can't see that only proves how young you truly are." The tears finally fell then, tracking down her cheeks as her composure crumbled. King Varik watched, his hands clenched into fists at his sides to keep from reaching for her, from offering the comfort every instinct demanded he provide. "Leave," he said, his voice rough. "Please, Iris. Just leave." She did, fleeing his study with her hand pressed to her mouth to muffle the sobs. And King Varik stood alone in the silence she left behind, feeling something crack in his chest, some barrier he'd maintained for centuries finally giving way. He loved her. Gods help him, he loved her. He had probably loved her for years, though he'd hidden it even from himself, disguising it as guardianship, as responsibility, as anything other than what it truly was. But she was 17 and he was 300, and the gulf between them was too vast, too dangerous. He had made the right decision. He knew he had. So why did it feel like the worst mistake of his very long life? That night, King Varik made another decision. One that would govern the next several years. One that would test his resolve in ways he couldn't yet imagine. He would wait. If what Iris felt was real, if it was truly love and not some confused projection born of gratitude and proximity, then it would endure. And when she was older, when she was truly an adult who had experienced the world beyond his walls, when she could make an informed choice unclouded by dependency,
Then they would speak of this again.
then perhaps he might allow himself to feel what he had been fighting for so long. The next morning, he called her to his study again. She came with red-rimmed eyes and a defensive posture, clearly expecting another rejection. "I've thought about what you said," he began without preamble. "And I've made a decision." She waited, barely breathing. "When you turn 21, a full adult by any standard, Omega or Lycan, I will revisit this conversation. If you still feel the same way then, if you still believe what you expressed yesterday, I will listen. Truly listen. Not as your guardian, but as whatever you wish me to be." Hope flickered across her face, quickly tempered by wariness. For years for you to be certain, for years to experience life, to meet others, to be absolutely sure that this is what you want. He paused, then added with painful honesty, "And 4 years for me to determine if I can be worthy of what you're offering." "You're already worthy. Let me be the judge of that." His tone gentled. "For years, Iris. If at the end of that time nothing has changed for you, then we'll talk. Really talk. And I won't hide behind excuses or age differences or power dynamics. I'll give you an honest answer about my feelings." It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something in between, something that acknowledged the impossibility of their current situation while leaving, opened the possibility of a future. She nodded slowly. For years, he confirmed. "Can you be patient with me for that long?" A smile touched her lips, fragile but genuine. "I've been patient for 5 years already. I suppose I can manage for more." But patience, King Varik discovered, was far easier to demand than to practice. Those 4 years were perhaps the most difficult of his entire existence. Not because of external threats or political challenges or battles that tested his strength, but because every single day he had to watch Iris grow more beautiful, more accomplished, more certain of herself, and maintain the distance he had imposed. She honored his request in ways both heartbreaking and admirable. She didn't push, didn't demand, didn't try to seduce or manipulate. She simply continued her life, her studies, her work with the healing arts. But the way she looked at him during their now rare encounters held a promise, a patience, a certainty that shook him to his core. At 19, she had mastered healing techniques that usually took Omegas decades to learn. She could draw poison from wounds with a touch, could ease pain with nothing more than focused intention, could sense injuries and illnesses in others with uncanny accuracy. The Lycan warriors began to consider her not just a member of the household, but an essential part of their community. She had saved lives, eased suffering, provided comfort when comfort seemed impossible. She had earned her place through genuine merit rather than political arrangement. At 20, King Varik made what he thought was a necessary but devastating decision. He called Iris to his study and presented her with a proposal that had taken him months to formulate. "I want you to see the world," he said without preamble. "To travel beyond these walls, beyond this kingdom. To meet people from other lands, other cultures. To experience life outside the protection of my household." She stared at him, understanding dawning slowly. "You want to send me away?" "I want to give you freedom," he corrected, though the distinction felt hollow even to him. "How can you possibly know what you want if you've never experienced alternatives? You've been here since you were 12, Iris. This is the only adult life you've known. And whose fault is that?" The flash of anger surprised them both. "You could have sent me away years ago, let me go back to my clan, or found me another arrangement. But you kept me here, educated me, protected me. Don't pretend now that you were doing me some kind of disservice." "I'm not suggesting. You're testing me." She said it with absolute certainty, her empathic gifts no doubt sensing his true motivation beneath the rational words. "You don't trust that what I feel is real, so you're sending me out into the world hoping I'll find someone else, something else, that will make this easier for you." He couldn't deny it. Wouldn't insult her intelligence by trying. "And if you do find someone else," he said quietly, "someone your own age, someone without my history of violence and isolation, wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't that be the life you deserve? Stop telling me what I deserve." Her voice cracked with frustration. "I'm 20 years old. I know my own mind. But fine." She straightened, composing herself with visible effort. "If you need this, if you need me to prove that I've considered alternatives, I'll go. I'll see your world, meet your people, experience everything you think I'm missing. But know this, Varik." She used his name, not his title, and the intimacy of it struck him like a physical blow. "When I come back, and I will come back, there will be no more excuses. No more delays. You will have to face what's between us without hiding behind my age or your honor or any other shield you've constructed." He nodded, throat tight. Agreed. And so Iris left the castle for the first time in 8 years, setting out to explore the territories beyond the northern wilds with an escort of trusted guards and enough resources to go wherever curiosity led her. King Varik told himself he was doing the right thing, that this was necessary, responsible, the final test to ensure she was making an informed choice. But when he stood in the courtyard and watched her carriage disappear into the distance, he felt something very much like despair. The months that followed were agony disguised as normal routine. King Varik threw himself into his duties with renewed intensity, managing his kingdom, mediating disputes, strengthening borders, doing all the things that had occupied his attention for centuries. But his mind was elsewhere. Constantly, obsessively elsewhere. Reports filtered back through the guards who accompanied Iris. She had traveled to the southern cities, where art and music flourished. She had visited the eastern academies, where scholars from across the realm gathered to share knowledge. She had sailed to the western islands, where different supernatural clans maintained an uneasy peace. And everywhere she went, she attracted attention. How could she not? A beautiful young Omega with exceptional healing gifts and uncommon intelligence. The reports mentioned suitors, young men, appropriate matches, some of noble blood, some of considerable power. King Varik read these reports with hands that trembled slightly, something that would have shocked anyone who witnessed it. Each mention of a man who had courted her, who had made his interests known, who had offered marriage proposals, felt like a blade between his ribs.
Good, he told himself.
This was good. She was experiencing the world, meeting alternatives, having the youth and freedom he had denied himself to protect. If she chose one of them, he would accept it. He would let her go. He couldn't even complete the thought. The idea of Iris belonging to someone else, of her spending her life with another man, of her gifts and her smile, and her warmth being given to anyone but him, it was unbearable. But he had promised to wait, promised to let her choose freely. And King Varik, whatever else he might be, had never broken a promise.
A year.
She was gone for a full year. 12 months during which King Varik became, according to his long-suffering advisors, increasingly impossible to deal with. He snapped at his council. He prowled the castle at night like the beast his title proclaimed him to be. He stood in the library where they had shared so many conversations, in the gardens where she had worked her healing magic, in doorways where he could almost see her ghost passing through. He missed her, more than he had thought possible to miss anyone. And somewhere during that endless year, King Varik stopped lying to himself about what he felt. Stopped pretending this was merely guardianship or responsibility or anything other than what it truly was. He loved her. Completely, devastatingly, eternally loved her. He loved her kindness and her strength, her intelligence and her compassion. He loved the way she had taken the trauma of her childhood and transformed it into empathy for others. He loved her stubborn determination and her gentle humor. He loved every conversation they'd shared, every moment of companionship, every glimpse of the remarkable woman she had become. Age didn't matter. The power dynamic didn't matter. His dark history didn't matter. What mattered was that somehow, impossibly, this young woman had reached into his ancient, guarded heart and claimed it so completely that the thought of living without her was more terrifying than any battle he'd ever faced. And if she came back having chosen someone else, having found happiness elsewhere, he would let her go. Because that's what you did when you truly loved someone. You wanted their happiness even above your own. But God's, he hoped she came back to him. When word reached him that Iris's carriage had been spotted on the road leading to his castle, King Varik felt something he couldn't remember feeling in his entire long life. Genuine fear. Not the adrenaline of combat or the wariness of political maneuvering. Real, visceral, terrifying fear. In a few hours, perhaps less, he would have his answer. She would either confirm that what they had was real, or she would gently tell him she had moved on, found someone more suitable, realized he had been right about her confusion. He stood in his private chambers, looking out over the courtyard, watching for the first sight of her return. His hands gripped the stone windowsill hard enough that he heard the ancient rock crack slightly under the pressure. 300 years of existence, and he had never been this afraid. The carriage arrived as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting everything in that same crimson and gold that had colored the sky the night she first arrived.
8 years ago now.
A full 8 years since that terrified child had stumbled out in an oversized wedding dress. King Varik made himself stay in his chambers rather than rush to the courtyard like some lovesick boy. He had dignity to maintain, a reputation to uphold. He would wait for her to settle in, to rest from her journey. He lasted approximately 20 minutes before giving up the pretense and heading to the gardens. She was there. Of course she was there. Standing among the flowering vines she had helped plant years ago, her face turned up toward the fading sun, looking like she belonged exactly there and nowhere else in all the world. She must have sensed his approach. Her empathic gifts would have alerted her to the storm of emotions he was barely containing. She turned, and their eyes met across the garden path. She looked different. Older, certainly. More polished, more worldly. Her clothes bore the influence of the places she'd traveled, incorporating styles from different regions. Her hair was arranged in a sophisticated manner he'd never seen before. She moved with the confidence of someone who had navigated foreign courts and held her own among strangers. But her eyes held the same warmth, the same certainty, the same love he had seen a year ago. "Hello, Varik," she said softly, using his name again. That intimacy that no one else dared claim. Iris. His voice came out rough. Welcome home. Is it? She asked, taking a step toward him. Still my home. Always. The word escaped before he could censor it, raw and honest. This will always be your home, regardless of anything else. She smiled, and it transformed her face, chasing away any lingering uncertainty.
Good.
Because I'm not leaving again. I've seen your world, Varik. I've met your people. I've experienced everything you wanted me to experience. He waited, barely breathing. And none of it compared to this.
To you.
To what we have here. His heart, which had been frozen in anticipation, suddenly hammered against his ribs. Iris. Let me finish. She closed the distance between them, standing close enough that he could have reached out and touched her if he dared. I met men who were young and handsome and age-appropriate. I met scholars and warriors and nobles and artists. Some of them courted me. Several proposed marriage. Each word was a knife, even as he understood she needed to say this. And I compared every single one of them to you. To the way you listen when I speak, as if my words matter. To the way you challenged me to think deeper, to question my assumptions. To the way you've never once treated me as lesser because I'm an Omega, because I'm young, because I'm not a warrior. She reached up, and he felt her fingers brush his jaw, the gentlest touch that nevertheless sent electricity through his entire body. I love you, Varik. Not because you protected me, not because I'm confused or grateful or dependent. I love you because in 8 years, through countless conversations and quiet moments and shared silences, you've shown me exactly who you are beneath the fearsome reputation. And that man, that endlessly patient, secretly gentle, determinately honorable man, is who I choose. The barriers he had maintained for so long, the restraint he had practiced through years of discipline, finally shattered. King Varik pulled her against him, wrapping his arms around her with a desperation he'd never allowed himself to feel. She melted into his embrace, her head resting against his chest, fitting against him as if she had been designed for exactly this purpose. I love you, he confessed into her hair, the words he had denied for so long finally free. I have loved you for years, though I didn't let myself acknowledge it. You terrify me, Iris. The depth of what I feel terrifies me. She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes shining. Why? Because I'm 300 years old, and I've never felt anything like this. Because you've become more essential to me than breathing, and I don't know what I would do if I lost you. Because loving you makes me vulnerable in ways I've spent centuries avoiding. Good, she said with a smile that held both mischief and tenderness. You've had 300 years to be invulnerable. Maybe it's time you tried something different. He laughed, then actually laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. You're asking me to change everything I am.
No.
She reached up, cupping his face with both hands, her empathic gift no doubt sensing every conflicted emotion swirling through him. I'm asking you to trust. To believe that what we have is worth the risk. To stop hiding behind honor and age and all your other excuses. And if I fail you, if the monster everyone fears actually exists beneath, then I'll remind you who you really are. Her certainty was absolute, just like I have been for 8 years. Just like I will for the rest of our lives, if you'll let me. The rest of our lives. The phrase should have terrified him. He had lived so long, lost so many people to the relentless march of time. Loving her meant watching her age while he remained unchanged, meant eventually losing her to mortality while he endured. But looking into her eyes, feeling the absolute certainty of her love, King Varik realized that even a finite forever with Iris was worth more than an eternal existence without her. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not, she agreed with a slight smile. But you're getting me anyway. No more waiting, Varik. No more excuses. I'm 21 now. I've seen the world. I've made my choice. The only question left is whether you're brave enough to make yours. He had faced down armies, had survived centuries of conflict and bloodshed and endless challenges to his authority. had built a kingdom through sheer force of will and unbreakable determination. But saying yes to this young woman, to the vulnerability and joy and terrifying possibilities she represented, required more courage than all of that combined. "Yes," he said, the word barely above a whisper. "Yes to everything. To you, to us, to whatever future we can build together." She rose up on her toes and he bent down, and when their lips finally met it felt like something fundamental in the universe clicking into place. Like a story that had been building for 8 years finally reaching its inevitable, perfect conclusion. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and slightly dazed, Iris laughed with pure joy. "Was that really so difficult?" "Excruciating," he admitted, but he was smiling as he said it, an expression so rare on his face that several servants who witnessed it later swore they'd imagined it. "Then it's a good thing I'm patient," she said, threading her fingers through his. "We have a lot of time to make up for."
They did.
8 years of restraint and distance and carefully maintained boundaries. 8 years of wanting and denying and protecting. But they also had the future. However long Iris's mortal life lasted, they would face it together. No more hiding, no more excuses, no more pretending the connection between them was anything other than what it truly was. The announcement of their formal courtship, not the marriage contract that had brought her here originally, but a genuine relationship entered into freely by 2 adults, shocked precisely no one in the castle. The servants had been speculating about this development for years. The warriors, who had watched their king slowly soften under Iris's influence, actually seemed relieved that he had finally acknowledged what everyone else had seen. There was gossip, of course. Questions about the age difference, the power dynamic, the unconventional nature of their relationship. But King Varik had spent 300 years not caring what others thought of him.
He certainly wasn't going to start now.
Iris had chosen him, freely, fully, with complete knowledge of who and what he was. She had seen the world, met alternatives, experienced everything he'd insisted she needed to experience. And she had chosen him anyway. That night, King Varik stood once again at his chamber window, looking out over the courtyard. But this time, he wasn't alone. Iris stood beside him, her hand in his, comfortable in the silence they shared. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "The waiting? All those years of restraint?" He considered the question seriously. The years had been difficult, yes, often painful, but they had also been necessary. Not for the reasons he'd originally told himself, but because they had given them both time to grow, to be certain, to build a foundation strong enough to support what they were attempting. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it.
We needed that time.
I needed to know you were sure. And you needed to become who you are now. Not the frightened child who arrived here, but the strong, certain woman standing beside me." She squeezed his hand. "I needed that time too. To understand my own strength, to be confident in my choices. To know that I love you not because you saved me, but because of who you are and who we are together." They stood in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars emerge over the wilderness that had been her home for 8 years. "The contract," Iris said eventually. "The original marriage contract that brought me here. What happened to it?" "Still technically unfulfilled," King Varik admitted. "Though I suspect your clan has long since given up on enforcing it." "Good." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Because when we do marry, and we will marry Varik, make no mistake about that, it won't be because of some political arrangement made when I was too young to consent. It will be because we choose each other every day for the rest of my life." "The rest of your life," he repeated, the words holding a melancholy he couldn't quite hide. "While I continue for centuries beyond." "Don't." She placed a finger against his lips. "Don't borrow sorrow from a future we haven't reached yet. We have now. We have today and tomorrow and all the days we're given. That's more than many people ever get." She was right.
Of course she was right.
And King Varik, who had spent 300 years believing he knew everything, found himself once again learning from this remarkable woman who had walked into his life in an oversized wedding dress and somehow, impossibly, became the center of his entire existence. "I love you," he said again, the words still new enough to feel strange on his tongue, but truer than anything he'd ever spoken. "I know," she said with a smile. "I've known for years. I was just waiting for you to figure it out." He laughed, pulling her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, how right this felt despite all the reasons it shouldn't work. They had waited 15 years for this moment. 15 years from the night a terrified child arrived at his castle to this night, when a confident woman stood in his arms and promised him a future he'd never dared to hope for. It had been worth every moment of restraint, every year of patience, every sacrifice along the way. Because some things, some people, are worth waiting for. And Iris, his omega, his love, his improbable miracle, was worth waiting lifetimes for. The story that began with a beast king and a child too young to marry had transformed into something else entirely. A love story forged in patience and restraint, built on genuine respect and understanding, proven through time and testing. They would face challenges ahead. The whispers and questions would continue. The reality of their different lifespans would eventually have to be confronted. The political implications of their relationship would create complications. But standing there in the darkness, holding each other as stars emerged overhead, King Varik and Iris knew one absolute truth. They had already overcome the hardest part. They had waited. They had been patient. They had given each other the time and space to be certain. And now, finally, they could begin their story in earnest. Not as guardian and ward, not as king and obligation, but as two people who had chosen each other freely and completely. The Beast King had waited 15 years for his Omega to be ready, and she had been worth every single moment.